I want you to avoid this horrible conversation behavior that will get people not wanting to talk to you, waiting to leave the conversation, and instead help you level up your conversation skills so you become very interesting, have an easier time connecting with people. People seek you out to consult with you. It's fun. Having good conversation is fun. It's a way to laugh. It's a way to learn. It's a way to expand the brain. And that's what a lot of life is about. So, as always, welcome in fam, much love, Trav here. We're going to be talking about conversation today. I'm just a person. I'm not perfect. I have nothing to sell you. There's gaps in my knowledge. But I have a unique perspective that you're not going to find anywhere else on the internet. And for those of you who've been following me for a long time, you know that this is true. And I promise you're going to get something of value from being with me here today. So, as usual, I'm not here to convince you that you need to be better at conversation. I'm going to assume that you see the merit and the value and you clicked on this video because you don't want to drive people away and you want to bring people in. But yeah, there's a lot of nice things about good conversation. It makes life more fun. If you're good at conversation, it helps you forge more alliances with men. It helps you in romantic relationships with women. We converse for all kinds of reasons. We're going to kind of get into that, but it's a way for us to display intelligence and humor and education and emotion and also all sorts of different things. There's so much that's communicated. There's a lot of things that are communicated through just the physical appearance of our being, how we are, how we smell, our heart rate, our breathing patterns, and so on. But a lot is communicated through conversation. That's something that makes us unique amongst the animal world, is the depth of conversation that we're able to have because we have such complex language. Now, why do people have conversation? Well, people have conversation for a lot of reasons. A lot of it's functional, a lot of it's practical, but in this particular discussion, it's the sort of conversations for connection, for learning, for humor, for interest, for expanding the mind, for feeling good, right? So when someone is in a conversation with you, or when you're in a conversation, there's different things we're looking for at different times. I'm not going to say it's always the same thing. Sometimes we just want to relate to the other person, and sometimes we want validation from the other person. We want to feel seen. Oftentimes we're interested in learning. Sometimes we're looking for an emotion, either to laugh or to make somebody laugh. Sometimes these are good reasons to have a conversation, and there's probably less valid reasons to have a conversation. Manipulation, trying to get someone to feel a certain way about you, or trying to get someone to do a thing. Although there's times, right? Again, there's all kinds of categories of conversation where if I'm an employer and you're an employee, then I'm giving some kind of a command, you should do this or whatever. Like there's endless, limitless reasons to converse. But for this, talking about the sort of situations where you have a intimate relationship with someone, whether that is a friend or a romantic partner and or a relative, someone that you're close with, and imagine you're sitting at dinner and you're talking with them, or you're sitting in the car and you're driving with someone. So let's start with the antithesis of what you should do, and this is what drives people away, and we'll kind of go back in the opposite. And I will say that part of the advice that I'm going to give that is unique is also very difficult. As usual, I give certain things where I say, like, I make recommendations that are not easy to follow because it implies that it's going to take a lot of work. So in becoming a good conversationalist and displaying humor, intelligence, education, and so on, it's not as simple as just mirroring the person or repeating what they said or some kind of tactic. Like it takes work to do, right? The body of your life and your experience and your education and so on. No, what you don't want to do and want to what repulses people is this. And the reason why is because oftentimes one of the most basic things that we're looking for when we're conversating, this isn't always, it's a generalization, but often is people like to talk about themselves and people like to learn about themselves. So if someone is talking to you about their day, oftentimes they're interested in hearing some kind of insight that will help them internalize or come to a solution. And again, it depends. They're not always looking for a direction of what to do. Sometimes they're just looking for someone to listen to. But regardless, if they're talking about themselves, oftentimes it's to learn more about themselves, or to resolve something within themselves, right? So we'll start from here, and we're going to go in different directions. But say that I'm with you, we're driving, and you're talking to me about your day. Something happened. Let's say something happened at work, like there was an issue at work or something. Just random example. We'll try to use some other random examples. So the basic, what would drive you away, and what your motivation is perhaps to, maybe you want some insight, or maybe you just want to feel validated and heard and listened to. So what would be the antithesis, what would drive people away and be repulsive, is if I interrupt you halfway through your story and say, well, and just start talking about my day. And this is what people do often. I call it rambling man syndrome. Especially older men, for whatever reason, tend towards this. I pray to God that I never go there, and that's why I'm making this, one of the reasons why I'm making this video, and I also hope for you as well. So if you ever catch yourself doing this, don't do it. Interrupt someone, steer the conversation back to yourself, your day, something not even necessarily related, and then later maybe demonstrate that you didn't listen to them by like asking a question that shows you didn't listen, or those are certain examples. That would be an example. That would be the worst thing. So it's just always steering everything back to yourself. Say we're talking, right? Whatever you say, I interrupt you and then talk about myself. That is repulsive and will drive people away. It shows that you're lack social cue, lack intelligence, not empathetic, and also have probably a narrow depth of life. So that would be, I'm going to start with the lowest. I'm going to go up. So that would be the lowest. Now, above that, and this is also common, and which is slightly better, is you tell me about your day. This thing happened at work. And I say, I let you finish, and I say, well, this thing happened in my day. Today, this thing happened to me. And people will do that because they're trying to relate, and because it's like, oh, it's my turn to be heard and to be validated and to be seen. But I'm not giving you what you want, right? You want me to say, like, one, okay, maybe you're interesting to me, tell me more about that. Different options. Or could be, hey, you have every right to feel that way, validation. Or insight, which we're going to get into. You might not be looking for me to tell you specifically, well, you should have done this and that, but you may be looking for, well, what do you think of, not just tell me more, but what do you think about that? Why do you think that happened, and so on, and sort of guided insight. Now, we'll go up a step further from here. So you tell me about your day, and you say, this thing happened at work, and it was an issue. And I listen to you, and I say, okay, well, once upon a time, a similar thing happened to me, and this is why I think it happened, this is what I did, and perhaps this relates to you in this way because maybe this person did it for the same reason, or you can take the same conclusion from this, or take the same action. This is a step up, and it's better because while you are talking about yourself, you are, and by talking about something similar, it's displaying that you have some amount of experience as a person. But the important thing is tying it back to them, where it, not just to relate, but it gives them some insight of how different things could play out, or what they might want to do, or what might have happened, or whatever. So that is an okay thing to do, and there's times for it, where somebody shares something and then you share something similar that happened. They share this thing, you share something similar, but it's still like, what about me? My turn, talk about me. It's still, to me, it's still not my favorite way to have these sorts of conversations. I think it's a lot better but I'm going to present another option. And that is where you don't even talk about yourself, and you don't just talk about them, but you tell me this thing happened at work and this happened. And I will tell you, there was a new study that came out that relates to this, because it shows that this thing that happened in work is common, and this is the reason why it happens. And here's how people tend to react to it. And it relates back to you because it explains why some of these things are happening. So people really like that, and they like it because, for a lot of reasons, the focus stays on them until it's their turn to pass it off, whatever. You're not changing the subject until they're ready. You're validating them by seeing them. You're not being selfish by bringing the conversation back to yourself. You're displaying that intelligence and education, that you read books and look at studies or whatever, and you are giving them insight where you're sending it back to them, and they get to learn about themselves and possibly have an aha moment about their experience. So what I'm suggesting is there's different basic patterns of these sort of one-on-one conversations. And this is what we're talking about. I mentioned dinner, being in a car or whatever. It could be a couple, it could be a small group as well, but the lowest is person A says, this happened to me today. Person B says, something else happened to me today. Above that, person A, this happened to me today. Person B, that happened to me once before. Above that, this happened to me today. Person A says, this happened to me today. Person B says, here's some insight on why that happens from a famous story or book or study, right? Some kind of anecdote. So when you do that, you become a source of entertainment, you become a source of validation, you become a source of education, a source of insight. Obviously, you're displaying all these nice characteristics, but it's the experience that the other person gets. They're not driven. They get a lot. Conversation is very interesting for them. They're more likely to share with you. They're more likely to seek you out, and also appreciate what you're doing. So now, like I mentioned before, this isn't particularly easy. It's not as simple as okay, if somebody says something, you mirror it back to them in such a way. It's not as simple as making eye contact. It's not as simple as some kind of active listening technique. I'm suggesting that you're going to be a much better conversationalist, which is going to help you in male alliances and romantic relationships and family and everything in between, if you are well-read and well-studied and well-educated. It doesn't mean you need to go to university. It means you should read books, you should listen to podcasts, and so on and so forth. And that's why it's not easy, that's why it's not simple, because you have to be a person who is in the habit of, say, reading for 30 minutes a day and listening to a podcast for an hour a day, whatever it is. Continuing education, right? And I'll back up for a moment and say, this isn't always appropriate. There's different things you can do and say in conversation. It's a choose your own adventure. People don't always want to hear you throwing some fact or some anecdote back at them, but also it's not facts and anecdotes, but stories. Like, there's a famous story, or there's someone happened to a friend, or it can be a people-focused insight. But the point is, what it does is it steers the basic conversation is, we're talking about you and me, or you're talking about you, then I'm talking about me. Talking about you and me can be interesting. But what is often quite interesting is talking about things outside of ourselves. This can be basic gossip, which people enjoy, but also ideas. What do you think about this big picture concept, right? That's a lot more interesting than taking turns talking about ourselves. Is not even talking about ourselves, but you share about you, I share about an idea and relate it back to you. You synthesize that, you learn something, and then you share an insight on that idea. Now we're talking about something beyond ourselves and we're learning, and it's fun, right? But it requires both parties be somewhat educated, and again, it can be personal education. So that's an idea for you, and the takeaway isn't do this in conversation, and the takeaway is to be more well read. The takeaway is to spend more time reading. The takeaway is to spend more time studying. And uh, when you do that conversation, especially with someone else who's better educated, so fun, man. Like talk, if you read the same books, or you've studied the same subjects, or you've um, interested in the same ideas, it makes for a lot more interesting conversation. This type of conversation you can get lost in for hours. So again, like that's the type of thing people don't want to leave the conversation. People want to leave when it's like, man, this guy just steers everything back to himself. Whatever I say, he talks over. It's like I don't even exist. I want to get away. And then at that point, also, if you're doing that, people just shut up and they stop sharing, and they'll let you ramble. Like if someone is just letting you ramble, it's a bad sign, right? If you find yourself rambling and the other person's just listening, and you're not steering it in a clear way back to an idea or them, then um, it's not a great sign. Although it can, there's maybe times for it, but if it's a pattern. Now, before I wrap up here, I'll give you one tactic that is nice, which is related, and this is something that's easy to do. So being well educated with all kinds of related history and social science and studies that you can relate to someone's experience to help them enlighten and learn more about themselves. That is a hard thing to do. Something that's easy to do is shutting up. Like, related to the rambling man is just talk over you and then just talk, 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 talk. Now, that is the lowest level, the rambling man. I just keep talking. Now, what is above that but is also irritating is I only ask you questions. I ask you questions, I talk over you, I bring it back to myself. I ask you questions. So, like, the asking questions is fine. Obviously, there's a lot of times where it's great. It's not inherently good, though. You can ask a question that demonstrates you weren't listening. Like, asking a statement and slash question that says that I totally didn't listen to what you said. Because I'm assuming the opposite of what you said clearly, right? Now, that is, or you can ask a question that shows you listened and here's some added insight. However, what often, in terms of moving a conversation forward, what is often better than asking a question is saying nothing. You share your thing and you trail off. And the reason why this is nice is because in conversation, you and I often have a thread or direction that we want to go. Maybe we have something on our chest we want to get off, or something that was interesting or exciting we want to talk about. And if we don't ask the right question, it doesn't necessarily open it up for conversation to go in that direction. You know, you could say, is there anything else you want to talk about? That comes off as creepy and weird, though. Why? Well, because, well, I mean, there's times, but the point is when you say nothing, and create a silence, you are creating a certain safety that you're not bombarding them and you're also not prying and you're allowing them to take the initiative. People like to take the initiative in conversation at times where if you don't want to say anything, you don't want to say anything, but after a long silence, people get to think and they got to think about where they want to go, where they want to steer with it. So steer the conversation. So that's a tactic that's easy to do is when you're done talking, stop talking until they talk at times. Again, especially if, yeah, a lot of the time, like you don't need to, just don't be a rambling, don't be a rambling man where you ramble and talk about yourself. Now, I think I had one more tactic or point that I could share with you. It came across my mind was going over this. Let me ponder this for just a moment. Maybe there'll be another video about it, but yeah, takeaways like a conversation. It's a way to connect. It's a way to demonstrate the type of person you are, show certain virtues and values. Not by bragging, but by demonstrating skills, like conversational skills, right? Conversation is a skill. It's a set of skills. And yeah, it's something to be studied and worth studying. So again, I don't have all the answers and also I have nothing to sell you. I'm just sharing as I'm learning and hope you find it interesting. Read more books, listen to more podcasts. It'll make you more interesting conversationalist. Peace and much love.